It's week 2 of VCT. We're going to jump straight into the Pickems of Pacific, Americas, and EMEA. We're going to start to root for a lot of these underdog teams just because we want the levels to rise. We want some of the middle of the pack teams to start to be competitive against the top dog teams like a PaperX and T1. The same thing for a lot of the other regions. We're going to jump straight into it with Global and Full Sense in Pacific. Full Sense seems like the favorite. They recently added Frost, and a lot of what was questionable about week 1, there was a lot of Premier back on the deadlock, which raised a lot of questions. A lot of fans are angry. A lot of fans were saying all types of things, saying why isn't Premier on the duelist? And so finally on map 3 in the series, they would end up closing it with Premier on the duelist back on his jet. And so it's going to seem like the styles are going to clash. Full Sense has been known for the double duelist, which led them into their first international. And going into this stage 2, it just seems like they're going to try to merge the two of Full Sense's original playstyle versus Frost's ideation of his comps and overall playstyle. And so there may be a mix again of Primi back on the deadlock, or they might just stick with Primi being full-time duelist. But given that a lot of this team relies on, or a lot what of the head coach relies on, is being unpredictable, only time will tell on how this team will operate. Whereas Global seems like the underdog. They seem like, it's the same roster. They didn't make it into playoffs. Some would say it's the players, some say it'd be the coaching. And this is the match that sets the stage for who was right and who was wrong. As much as the match, just seems like, a regular thing, it feels like there's a lot more tension that is going to go on, especially if or in this case, this game is close. And so I'm really excited, as given that today it's only a couple hours away, and it sets the tone for how the rest of the week is going to play off, just because I feel like a lot of the underdog teams have a chance to step up and be able to make it, clinch your way into a first seed and clinch your way into playoffs and make it all the way to champs. And so for a team like Global, pretty much an underdog in the sense, I feel like they should be able to kick their way up and show that Pacific isn't just, a top 2 or top 1 team, because PaperX has been holding the mantle. And so Full Sense and Global are, right along the ladder of being in the top 4 in this region. And so with all that said, I think I'm gonna go with Global. As much I think what I want, I believe that Full Sense is gonna win, but if I, have the prediction and I firmly believe who's gonna win, I think Global will end up winning the series. And so that leads to our next game in T1 versus Viral. I think T1 has shown that they're pretty dominant, or at least, pretty competitive. In T1's game against PaperX, we saw that PaperX were starting to play a lot more looser. They're playing, the mix. They're a lot more kind of like gimmick comps, not in the sense of like, hey, we're just gonna troll our way into this. They're still really competitive. They're still trying. They're still clearly still wanted to win. And so I think T1 showing that, okay, at the end of the day, PaperX are going to make the series as long as possible. Even if they win the map, maybe they relax on the brakes. But given that T1 end up winning the series into overtime in a map 3, I think that shows that they're willing to take the next step to be able to compete with the top 2. Because right now, as we're ranking standings, I feel like T1 are the number 2 team. Even though they didn't make Masters London, I think that they have shown really great form. They just happened to run into PaperX in the previous stage, which denied them of a international. And yes, you could say the same thing for Full Sense, but I think it's just a matter of form. If T1 are in really great form, given that the players that they have, then they can be a championship winning team, like a champs winning team, not just a Pacific team, like a Pacific champs team, an actual world champion team. So I think, given that T1 are looking to be dominant in the stage, clinch a playoff spot pretty early, I think that they make this game pretty, out of Varel's reach. I feel like Varel can make it competitive, especially with Foxy9, but given that Team Secret, which was their previous opponent, wasn't, on par with one of the top 4 teams, it's hard to gauge where Varel are. I think it's really important that they make this game competitive, just because as they continue on through the stage, it shows that they are, they have the firepower, they have the game plan to be able to match top teams. And you're going to be able to, you pretty much need to match the top teams in order to make top 2. Because most of the teams, especially Varel, they just got their first win. And so they need to make top 2 in order to make it to champs, because that's the goal everybody wants. And then the next game, RRQ versus Zeta. I feel like RRQ has always, at least for this year, has always been on a decline. They just haven't been on the same form as they did previously. And I feel like maybe this is a game for them to bounce back. This is even in the previous stage where they played Zeta, like a lot of those games were close, like against teams that are on the bottom of like in terms of standings in Pacific. And so if RRQ comes into this game being pretty dominant, I think that they end up showing that they can bounce back and be able to carry on into the stage. Whereas Zeta, they showed that they're pretty competitive against a Gen G in the last game of last week. I think it was just a matter of Gen G having more experience, Caron being back on the smokes, and a lot of Gen G's rookies, having a lot more it factor, a lot more, consistency throughout the series than Zeta. And so Zeta has a huge chance to upset. And so while I think that RQ will bounce back, I think I'm gonna go for Zeta as an upset, just because I think while they aren't, maybe on terms of a power level against like, a Varel, I think they have a huge chance to kind of like put down RQ, in which they're kind of like crumbling at the moment. And so next game, Paper X versus DFM. As much as I love DFM and I would put them in the scenario, I feel like even if Paper X throw out a mix comp thrown in with the Gecko, I think Paper X overall level on an off day would just pretty much dominate DFM, which is crazy to say, just given that, if we go in a flashback of what was it last year, of when DFM almost eliminated Paper X from even being able to make it into international. If Paper X lose to DFM last year, they were kind of on the same level, which is crazy to say. But since then, Paper X has grown so much to be a top 5 team in the world. And so since they had this top 5 form, I don't think they stooped down into a DFM that just hasn't shown that much um, great things. And an odd thing to say, especially with the DFM, and I've seen these a lot with a lot of teams in different regions, is that they love a map choice. I remember if Pearl's in the pool, they're picking Pearl, and I think that's a downside, and that doesn't show growth as a team that's looking to be competitive in internationals. Like you want to have a good overall map pool, but if you're constantly picking Pearl, and even when we go into EMEA, like Pacific, they love playing split, and if teams know you love playing split, then they'll just prefer split. And most of the times, really good teams will beat you on split, even how confident you are. And so, even though this isn't the case for DFM, just because I feel like they don't have that map anymore, they don't have their Pearl anymore, that just makes them just a little bit weaker. And so, last year, this would be a trap game, with given how popular Paper X is, but in this case, Paper X just stomp them on an off day, even if it is off day. Then Global versus Nongshim, I think Nongshim need to bounce back. They currently lose in back-to-back fashion in week 1. And so it's not a good look for a team that pretty much won an international champion in a meta that suited them. And this, if they don't win, pretty much if they don't win this game, yes, they still have a chance in play-ins, but it starts to default to the factor that maybe Nongshim just had hit a lightning in a bottle, which is crazy to say, just given that how dominant they were in their run. And so Nongshim pretty much need to be a lock in this game, as much as I root for Global, given that their players, they have that underdog mentality. I think Nongshim need to bounce back and have the chance to, especially given that the chance that this is a make it or break it. Yes, they have way less of a chance to be able to make top 2, which is needed in order to make it straight to playoffs, but they need to start showing signs that they can make a run. And the run is, this might be just one of the games where, hey, this win against Global kickstarted a run to be able to make it, to at least get some champs points so that we can lock in our place for champs. And so I would love to see Nongshim back on the international stage. And so I think this is a great pivot point for however they choose to adapt their style. And then the Team Secret T1, since T1 is in a back-to-back in a week 2, I think this gives Team Secret a highly favorite chance, just because, especially if they have a close game against Feral, then that gives them a lot of more footage to be able to prep and understand how T1 play. And given that this is only Team Secret's only game in week 2, I give them the chance to be able to be underdogs and beat T1, which makes a whole big shakeup in T1's group. Paper X, they're in their back-to-back. They play a KRX in the same situation as a Team Secret, and where Paper X don't really need to rely on a lot. They don't need to take the stage seriously. I think they do go for the win, but KRX desperately need this one. And a loss against Team Secret, it pretty much jeopardizes their chance of being able to make top 2. A lot of these games, because as we see, we only got 2 weeks left. In the typical normal traditional games, we've gone to week five, a game a week. But since this is a lot more condensed, a lot of these back-to-backs might punish a lot of these teams, especially Paper X that isn't taking it seriously. Whereas the DRX, yes, if they run their triple duelist comp, I think Paper X will win. But given that I'm gonna give TRX the benefit of the doubt, they change their comps. They just run something default. They just run something standard, something that they know. Even if they get back Young in, like that instantly makes them better than what if they decide to play triple duelist against Paper X, which doesn't make any sense because Paper X will just straight run at you, especially if you don't have a sentinel. You'll get flanks on flanks on flanks, and pushing out a spawn, like especially like you would think that triple dose speed would be able to handle the aggression of Paper X, but I think in that situation it just makes Paper X thrive. They just love to have that, be able to face aggression because they know, oh, if you're putting 5 times aggression, we'll double that, we'll triple that. And even though Paper X have actually maybe slided down on occasion, or generally most of the time, they just can't resist it. And Genji versus RQ, if RQ lose against Theta, then Genji is taking a good spot and maybe even clinching. Well, obviously we still need the rest of the weeks, but it's a good sign for Genji if RQ come and lose against Theta, and then RQ do the same showing, then Genji is insta lock versus RQ, which is crazy to say, just given that the only star players technically are Texture and Charon. Given that the rest of the players, Ash just came in, he's pretty recently. He hasn't been like a seasoned Genji player, whereas even the 2 rookies that they've added on, they also don't have that much experience. And so, given that we're just talking about week 2, they have really good chances of being able to be favorites for being able to clinch playoffs in their groups. And RQ, it's just a matter of how they choose to show their form, because if I look back at some of the games that they had, especially against GE, where they threw a 10-2 curse, or a 10-2 curse, a 10-2 deficit, I feel like there was just a lot of mistakes, a lot of individual error, like people going way out of like their way. Like I remember Cushy one round is going into a link by himself as the duelist. Like, yes, okay, you're trying to make space, but if you're trying to like fake as the duelist and it just doesn't look good, then it just looks really bad for the player. It looks like he's just going off and doing his own thing while the rest of the team is like headed back towards spawn or bottom mid. It doesn't make any sense. And so RQ, it's gonna be a make or break week. If they don't show good performances, they don't at least get a win, then they're pretty much down and out. And so, damn, that's been 15 minutes of Pacific, and we're gonna jump straight into Americas. Okay, let me just lock this in. And so then we're gonna jump straight into Americas and EG versus Leviathan. I think I would pick EG, given that just straight into it. I would pick EG, just given that I feel like this team has a lot of potential with their new additions with Zerona and Pancakes. I think they can give Leviathan a run for their money, depending on map pool, just because a lot of these teams we don't understand what their full map pool is, given that Sunset and Summit are in. And if Leviathan give EG a map, then a map 3 is, or kind of basically, if Leviathan give a map just like how they gave Sunset to Furia, then I think this is gonna be a good chance for EG to be able to win. Not to say that that's always gonna be a guarantee. That just is something we rarely saw, where Furia do a 13-1 on a Leviathan that just come back from winning an international. And so again, Leviathan, yes, they want to be able to clinch their way into champs, but I feel like this EG really is brewing something special, and they don't have like the star power, but we always got to remember the EG that made a run in 2024 didn't have superstar players. They started to like curate and establish their names in the scene. Once they established their name in the scene, they started going to internationals, then that's where they had the notoriety. Whereas EG are trying to piece it together in one stage and hopefully make it into champs. And kind of rooting for that same story, especially since given that Potter is, kind of on a back foot. She hasn't had that much successful rosters. I think this would be a huge springboard for EG. And Leviathan, I think even in a loss, this doesn't really define them depending on how they play it. If they just get completely stopped, would be out of this world. Like a crazy upset by EG, then that would be a whole different story. Whereas Leviathan, I feel like they would in this scenario they'll have decent form, they'll have great to decent form, but in this scenario, I think EG just out shoots them. In I think in this scenario, EG with good game plans and catching Leviathan early in the week, then I think they have a good chance. And MV versus MIBR, I feel like MIBR is the favorite, whereas MV they've kind of understand. Okay, we resorted back to the same thing. We're resorting back to standard comps. Whereas what we can thrive in is just being really aggressive. We pretty much have nothing to lose, and so why are we playing like just regular, like an average team? Like in terms of like, okay, like if we look at like if we look at the previous if we if we look at previous if you look at previous iterations of Envy, they always had a playstyle, whereas this Envy just looks bland. And if they go back to an aggressive style, and yes, it's a different IGL because Rossi isn't there, Inspire isn't there, Exer isn't there, and so yes, this is a different core roster, but we can still adopt the same principles because it's the same head coach. So why is it another case of where, hey, we gotta win against this team by just simply running it down and being more aggressive than this team, where we lose to an EG just by playing like just regular schmegular old Joe, you know, Valorant team. Like you can literally pick up off a premier team that's better, having a more aggressive playstyle than Envy, and maybe even get some win off of some of these tier one teams. Even a tier two team that has an established playstyle can beat a tier one team. And so I don't understand what Envy is doing, but given all that, I think they have a good chance if they go back to it. If they lean towards either Demon 1 on the Chamber, they have Kezin on the Duelist, maybe Knights double Duelist, they have Glyph, IGL, or, well, sorry, Rossi is IGL, but Glyph has experience IGLing, and they can trade smokes or, be initiator regardless. And so, or even a Sentinel. And so I think I'm a root for Envy just because I feel like they have the chance to be able to spark lightning in a bottle, whereas MIBR, they are so inconsistent. This team doesn't make any sense in terms of what their overall playstyle is. They're so hesitant. They don't make sense. It makes sense on paper, but they don't make sense on how they play. They just seem like a team like, hey, we're doing really well in scrims. We just kind of like kick back and, we play. It seems like, we have good vibes or whatever, but it just doesn't seem like a team that is just built together like a Leviathan, where Leviathan are all group of friends. They all, have really great synergy. Whereas MIBR just feel like a bot Golden State Warriors team that doesn't, make it to the finals. Which is crazy to say just because everybody has huge praise for Zekin and Ospas, and everyone wants to put the blame to the others, but it just doesn't seem like neither of Ospas and Zekin just haven't had any superstar performance. I mean, maybe off the top of my head, I can think of Zekin having a superstar performance, but even then, it hasn't been able to cross the line. Him or Ospas hasn't brought this team and say, "Hey, put I'll put you guys on my back and I'll win this game." Whereas them two, it just feels like they're juggling. Like they don't know. Okay, Zekin, you want to go and you wanna pop up? Okay, I'll just sit here. Whereas Zekin is like, oh, Ospas, okay, do your thing, do your thing. I'll put out util. I'll do flashes, whatever. This team doesn't make any sense, and so I'm gonna root for Envy. And then Furia versus Energy, I think Furia, given that their roster moves are pretty questionable, and given that Energy just came back against this MIBR team that is highly capable of being a top four team in Americas, um, I think Energy's just pedigree and the fact that they maybe have found something that can work for them. They just maybe had a slow start, and in their previous game against the Furia that is picking up scraps of whatever they had in stage one, just because only players that are left on the roster are Qualalube and Artisan, which is crazy to say just given how much success they had and how much of a short-term vision that Furia have. Whereas they could have continued to develop this roster. Yoru's back in terms of he doesn't have the same power level, but he's back and being able to be played. So how come? Yes, Yoru could have been nerfed to oblivion, but how come we don't have a foresight? We don't have a grand plan for how this team is going to play out. It just seems like, oh, we just ran into a brick wall and we're just figuring it all out. Rather as, hey, if anything happens, we have a set plan for how things will shape out. Even if there's a little bit of dip here, we're thinking of the overall vision. And so energy, a lock for this one. Um, if this was the first stage of Furia, I would pick Furia, but given how questionable it is, I'm gonna go for energy. Then 100 Crews, I am so down on Crew just because they've shown really great form in the beginning of stage one. Their map pick is Lotus, and given that 100 Thieves don't really play Lotus, it gives Crew the opportunity to be able to say, hey, we're not Lotus merchants, and so we'll still beat you in a series. Crew are always playing Lotus, and so I think this is another example of a team that's just always picking a map, and great teams will be able to beat you on the map, no matter how confident it is. Given that 100 Thieves form is starting to become incredible, I think that they just stomp a Crew. Unless a Crew, this team figures out, okay, like we're a better overall team. We're not just a team that focuses on, pure aggression and taking timings and stuff. Like, yes, that's part of the game, but what's the playstyle besides like being able to be, really great on a map and, abusing some of the agents. So 100 Thieves are locked for this one. And then G2 versus Cloud9. Cloud9, they had a close game with Sentinels, and I don't think that neither of these teams are really in a good spot. And so this is a huge bounce back game, regardless of who wins. And this is another org that has had questionable roster decisions, and especially as we go later into the year, it starts to see that, hey, Cloud9, Furia, some of these other teams, they're not going to make franchising. And so they're desperately trying to figure out something to be able to make it into a winning position, and maybe Riot changes their mind. Given that G2 I believe have stomped Cloud9 time and time again, this is their pedigree showing against a Cloud9 that might be stumbling after this close loss against Sentinels. And Sentinels versus Loud, I think I'm very big on the Loud roster. I think they have huge amount of potential. I just think that given that John QT is coming back, and they showed pretty decent form, without, given that they had a sub, and their IGL was out, Jonah P was IGLing, and so I think Sentinels have a really good chance. I don't think it would be like anything dominating, unless John QT has some crazy reads, like some crazy, some crazy reads, some crazy shooting, just because John QT was pretty much the top player heading into kickoff, and kind of let him throughout until they made some roster changes. But as of now, given that Cortezia has always had great form, but if they're able to combine the two with the potential of Redux and Jerwin and Jonah P having his stability, being a rock for the team, whereas Loud are coming in, I feel like, as maybe even the underdogs. Just honestly, I think this is a 50-50, but I'm gonna have to go for Sen. I think I'm really high on both of these teams being able to at least be competitive in terms of, either making it out of play-ins, or, pretty much I my hope for these teams, both of these teams, Sentinels allowed to for them to be able to make it into playoffs. At the very least, I think that would be um shooting for that. I think that would be their ceiling, and if they're able to make it to the top two position, then that would be like shooting above the stars, which is great for either of these teams. And then Envy versus Leviathan, I think depending on how the form that Envy is, I think I'm gonna have to split towards Leviathan, just given that Leviathan, um, both of these teams, they given that if Envy beat MIBR in the same dominant fashion, it's probably definitely not going to be in the same dominant fashion. But given Leviathan, I think I would go for Leviathan. But I really want Envy to be able to rise and show like some really great performances. But hey, if it goes to map 3 and it's close, then I'm cool with Leviathan winning. I just want competitive game, especially with Envy, given their roster. I just want the roster to show their potential, even if they don't close games. Like if they make the games close, then I am a happy man walking out of that. So I'm gonna have to go with the EG upset with Leviathan, but then Leviathan bounce back and win against Envy. And then Furia versus MIBR, I think given that both of these teams do back to back in the same week is pretty odd. Um, I don't recall if that's the case for any of these others, especially in the other regions. But If MIBR lose to Envy, then they most likely bounce back to Furia, unless Furia do the same thing against NRG, which is kind of funny because I have both of these teams losing. So one of these teams had to win. And I think, given that if they play a if Furia play a close series against Energy, and MIBR play a close series against Envy, then those two are very different stories, and one of them is bad and one of them is decent. If Furia have a close series with Energy, then that can be something like they can walk out and be like, oh, okay, we're competitive, we were just like this close to be able to win the series. Whereas if Envy make a series close with MIBR, then that is a lot of questions on MIBR. And given that I want these games to be competitive, I think I'm gonna go with Furia. And so we're gonna lock that in. And then for EMEA, I missed the beginning of the week, just or the beginning matches of this week, just because I was a little bit late. I was editing a previous video. We don't have to go into that, but we're just gonna go and pick the teams. Unfortunately, I can't lock it in, but we're just gonna go off of what we have right now. And Eternal Fire, Team Heretics, we're just going to quickly go through this. I think Team Heretics isn't anywhere near capable of their top 2 international performances. Like they're in terms of them placing top 2, the multiple times, within the year that they had, they aren't anywhere as close. If Wu is still on the Neon, then best believe that Team Heretics is not touching an international stage. And that's harsh to say, but I think given the footage that I saw against Team Liquid, if they keep that form, unless I'm proving them wrong, hey, if Team Heretics prove me wrong, then we can just say that. But as of now, I believe Eternal Fire can pretty much dominate this game. I know that they faced a KC that is showing really great form. They almost edged out a game against Fnatic, and I was honestly rooting for them. I hope that Karma Corp show really great form and able to be able to play on an international stage, just because I don't think, like, when I look at the team, like, it just seems like there's a lot more cohesion. Like there's a lot more of like a freedom, like not necessarily on par with Paper Rex, but the team just seems like they're finally being able to be set up for success, and they're finally suited for each other. And that's a great sign for a Common Corp that pretty much didn't have a win at all this whole year until this stage. So yeah, that was my little spiel on Common Corp. We'll go into Team Heretics at the end. But Gentlemates versus Navi, I think Navi bounced back. They unfortunately lost to Team Heretics. I think that Gentlemates are, if they beat Foot, I think they're favorites to be able to make it into playoffs. But given that they don't have a great series against a Foot team, then that shows really bad concerning signs, because Gentlemates at one point was on top of the world. They're playing against a BBL for a top seed in EMEA at one point, whereas now they've kind of been regressing, and it's hard to say ever since the Yoru nerf. It's hard to say where they tend to lean on, just because a huge question mark on this roster is Bebo, and everybody, or a lot of discussion has been made about how, hey, if you have Vipo and Sentinel and Vipo's not performing, there's a lot of Sentinels in EMEA. So why aren't you choosing that? If Mini is a good, Sentinel, just get a good duelist. Like either way, like just why are we holding on to loose threads? So that's a big question mark, and we'll have to see it towards the end of the stage if that get answered. Then Foot versus BBL, I think Foot, given that they play a back-to-back pretty soon, I would give the edge to BBL, but given that Foot, actually, I think yeah, I would heavily lean towards BBL, just given that Foot didn't really have a great performance against Pacific. They dropped Lotus and pretty much could have made a statement win against the Pacific that hasn't won at all, but they made things pretty close in the overall series. Whereas BBL have the footage. Foot, if they keep the form, they're definitely going to lose to BBL. But I think I'm gonna get Foot, just because I was a little bit higher. I hope they return to the international stage, just because I feel like this team has a lot of potential and room to grow, and they pretty much need this one in order for them to be able to have a good chance of that. And then Team Liquid versus Fnatic, given that Fnatic, I'm putting a lot of doubt on teams that play double within the same week. Not only is it like a fatigue thing, especially if you have a close series in which they did have Common Corp, but it's like giving away a lot of footage. Like most teams only prep for one match, and so they're practicing throughout the week, and so there's a lot that weighs on, hey, we're gonna focus on this opponent, win or lose, like we just move on. Whereas you go into focusing against the Karma Corp, then you have to quick turn around and focus on a team Liquid. And most of the time, things aren't going to be as detailed as the first opponent, and that's just the given nature of how things play out. And for for Vitality and Pacific, I think Pacific have a huge chance to upset. I'm rooting for the underdogs, but I think given that they don't make a third map competitive against a foot, um, it's kind of hard to say, hey, Pacific, you have a chance to be able to beat Vitality. And unless Vitality show their early form, like where they're like really bad, then I think Vitality is a clear lock for this one. Then GX versus Eternal Fire. If Eternal Fire pretty much breeze through Heretics and they breeze through Giant X, BBL versus Navi. I think Navi, especially if they beat a Gentlemates and BBL come off a game right after them, I think Navi are in a good prime position, and BBL maybe digress a little bit in form, just given that they have a back-to-back, and Navi have pretty much the game to be able to watch for them. I think Navi have the advantage. And then Team Heretics versus Carmine Corp. I think Carmine Corp showed really great form against the Fnatic, and unfortunately they did lose in overtime, but at that point it's just a mere 50-50. And at the same time, they get to watch Team Heretics play Eternal Fire. Even if Team Heretics beat Eternal Fire, I feel like I'm pretty high on Carmine Corp. So yeah, this has been the Pickems for all three regions. We're gonna lock those in, and within a couple hours, we're just about to see Global versus Full Sense, and so we're pretty excited to see that. I have a Twitch. I'll be live streaming that. If not, you can check out the VOD that I'll have for that video or for the game. And yeah, make sure you subscribe, like. I'll be doing more pickup. I'll be doing more pickups, and we'll be sharing a lot of the things that happen in VCT, just because within this stage 2 there's just going to be a lot of things happening. And even this past week, this there was literally 3 2-10 comebacks, which was crazy and impossible thing that I would never see happen. Not only to see it once or back to back, but 3 times within the same week is crazy to think about. So yeah, my name is Amor, and I'll see you later.